Hey everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations and your assignment today. We're going to be talking about the new moon in Libra. Now, I'm sure by now you're like going, what is currently going on at the moment? Like, I know that we go through these shifts and we, deal with intense patterns of evolutionary change, but oh my gosh, this Venus retrograde entrance was something to be marveled at, honestly. I'm sure a lot of people just had a normal, casual day, but from what I've seen around me and including my own life, we definitely got a very interesting, I got an interesting front row seat to look at what this Venus retrograde was about. It was nuts, really. It was really, really crazy. So hopefully today I'm going to help us process a little bit through this. And also, I am excited to actually share with you that I've created a 4-part essential needs workshop, and this is completely designed to help you work with this Venus retrograde cycle. And I'll let you know more about that after we talked about this new moon. Okay, so actually, before I jump into that, if you don't know of the ways that we also share our knowledge of the current astrology at the moment, we have a Facebook page, we have a Patreon page, and of course YouTube over here, and all of those links to those places are in the description below. We write articles as well, so there's some information over there too, if you prefer reading than, say, for instance, listening to audio when it comes to digesting this information, as well as some other stuff that's available on those sites as well, okay? All right, so new moon in Libra, 9th of October 2018, and we have 15 degrees, right? Sun's at 15 degrees of Libra, the moon's at 15. Of course, when you're watching this video, it's not actually the case anymore because the sun would be at 16 and moon would probably have moved into the later degrees of Libra. Okay. So then we've also got this conjunction that's taking place with Mercury, even though Mercury is at 28 degrees Libra and is ahead of the sun at the moment. We've got this conjunction that's taking place. So we know that there's something around communication and expression of communication. And we know there's something here around the nature of balance and equality and fairness, right? How do we relate to ourselves and to other people? And how are we validating that creative self? I mean, this is just the surface level of what this energy looks like when we just look at those symbols in that conjunction. We also then have Saturn in Capricorn at 3 degrees. It's direct. The Mars is conjuncted South Node, well, the South Node all in Aquarius there. And Venus, of course, now is retrograde, which is, I think, the big deal for this chart, right? I think it's quite interesting that, we have Venus retrograde in Scorpio, right? And we have a new moon that sits in Libra at the exact same time that this Venus retrograde energy comes to us. So we can see that this energy is pushing towards really, really getting to the core of what the Venus retrograde symbol is trying to talk to us about. Okay. So if we look at the Venus retrograde itself, it's sitting at 10 degrees. It's going to go move backwards through Scorpio. So we know that we're going straight into the underworld. Venus is actually also conjunct Persephone, the asteroid Persephone. And I don't have it on this chart, but the asteroid Ceres is also conjunct the sun and the moon. Now, I don't know if many of you are deeply into the mythology of Ceres, Persephone, and Pluto. I highly encourage you to go and investigate that. Although I have to warn you that there's a lot of like surface value information, just general Ceres is the great mother harvester, and Persephone is the innocent person and gets adopted by Pluto or Hades. But there's something really, really deep that is tied into this new moon around Persephone, Ceres, and Pluto, okay? Which I also want to go into. And, right now I'm just kind of identifying the chart for those of you that are into astrology. So Persephone's conjunct Venus in Scorpio. It's going to be moving backwards, that Venus that is. And then we've got Neptune in Pisces, right? Still retrograde. And of course, Uranus retrograde as well. Now, at the moment, the chart doesn't actually show it, but at the moment, Venus is opposing Uranus. Venus is squaring Mars, and of course Venus is squaring the nodal axis as well, right? Just at the exact same time that Uranus is squaring the nodes. So we've got this huge fixed cross square that's taking place between two personal planets, Mars and Mars and Venus, and then we have more of like transpersonal dynamics taking place, right? Uranus being something that's about your own personal subconscious relatability, your own personal subconscious memory and how that's, part of the collective. And then we have the nodal axis, which are points in space that really reference a destiny line, essentially, right? Imagine if you had to look at a fractal and you notice how the fractal goes into different directions like that. Think of the nodes of the moon as the line that keeps the fractal from keeping it going into its direction. So the nodes are like your fractal of your specific journey here on Earth, and that road that you're walking on, that fractal that you're walking on, has like themes, and those themes are the planets themselves. When you're looking at Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, think of them as the collective theme interfacing with your individual themes, which would be these personal planets. Okay, so there's this kind of really, really, really profound connection between Mars and Venus's relationship to each other and how they're interfacing with your individual subconscious memories of prior lifetimes, of early imprinting from this lifetime, and how that is affecting your relationship and the collective's relationship to our destiny. In other words, the destiny line that we're currently seeing reality through. Okay, so let's break that down, right? Let's break that down. So Venus in Scorpio talks about a couple of things. One of them is really getting into a state of being where we're focusing very, very inwardly on ourselves. And the irony of the situation is that when we had this retrograde period between June and the end of August, with Mars retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Pluto was retrograde, Saturn was retrograde during those periods of time, we were also deeply inwardly focused. I mean, a lot of people were kind of like going around going, what is happening? Like, I feel uncertain about stuff. Things don't seem to be clear. All of those types of dynamics were taking place for us. And then, Pluto went direct, Saturn went direct, Mercury went direct, Mars went direct. And in September, we felt like we had a little bit of, sure footing. But now with Venus going retrograde, it's going back into that place again. Although from my point of view, this time around, what we're going back into is the place that we developed during this June, July, August period. In other words, we're going back to that same place, but instead of looking at that inner place with the lens of a pre-Venus retrograde vision, we're looking at it now from, okay, that's not essential. That's not essential. This doesn't work for me in my life. This is what's good for my growth right now. This is not what's good for my growth right now. This is what's healthy for me. This is not what's healthy for me. And we're kind of like doing a garage sale of all of the outdated things that no longer support the destiny line for us collectively and individually. Okay. So whatever that is in your life, and I encourage you to really like understand that when you're watching this video, what I mean by this is it's very easy for us to get into our heads and go, what does that mean? Or how does that, versus just feeling into what is your life about right now? What are you doing? Where are things going? And most of the time people, and you might feel like, yeah, but I don't know what that is. And that's okay, because we're at different points in different places within our journey. But the key here that I want us to resonate with in this conversation is, what does that mean for you? And where are you in that part, in that story now? What kind of values are coming up for you that you don't need to hold on to anymore and you can just cut out? So Scorpio wants to cut and release and let go of, right? So it's helping the Venus retrograde cycle. It's helping us go, no longer needed, no longer needed, no longer needed. And it's not doing it in a very kind of cute way. It's kind of like cut, done, right? So a lot of us are experiencing a feeling of like scarcity, like, oh my God, I have to invest in certain things that I didn't expect, or I have to pay out certain debts, or I have to pay, like basically give resources to things that, were unexpected. And this is another reason why you can see when Mars in Aquarius is squaring Venus, it's a shock. It's like sudden, oh, this came into this story and now I have to deal with this, right? And what I've observed so far, and I sincerely empathize for those of you that have unfortunately been affected by loss. I've just seen a lot of loss around me recently, and people have lost suddenly friends, parent, cousins and stuff like that. It's really, really big. And this is a great opportunity to not only show you how the law of impermanence reflects itself through the astrology, but that it also has a great deal to do with the trine between Neptune and Scorpio, or Pisces and Scorpio in the chart, okay? So let me be more clearer. The law of impermanence is simply the acknowledgement that everything that exists and living form at some point ends its cycle, okay? And so essentially, the only thing that is constant is the nature of energy itself in its most original form. So the source of creation itself forms other forms of creation like this, like Earth, like human bodies. But at some point, that energy ends its cycle and it moves on. So Scorpio correlates specifically to when that cycle is birthed or regenerated and when that cycle ends. Okay, Venus and Scorpio, Jupiter and Scorpio. The square between Scorpio and Aquarius, which is where you can see the South Node is and where you can see Mars is where the dynamics of liberation take place from what was bound and osmosed with. In other words, we have two family members, they're living in this life together, we're all osmosed with it, and then somebody dies, right? The one family member dies, right? Or the one person dies. Through the shock, Aquarius, detachment occurs that removes the emotional bond held in Scorpio, and that's when we experience loss in Scorpio. So it's not necessarily loss, loss is not necessarily associated with Scorpio as an archetype, even though the archetype of loss is experienced through Scorpio. It's actually Aquarius's square to Scorpio, and its sudden change in pattern or an emotional attachment that creates the feeling of loss from the ego and its attachment. Okay, so right now you can all see that Venus squaring Mars and Venus squaring the South Node is that we're all experiencing shocks that are essentially creating a need to objectify your attachment to whatever it is that you're emotionally bonded with, and then through that observation get clarity around whether or not this is essential for you or not. Now, that's one specific situation. Another specific situation is that through loss and the shock, there is a detachment that forces you deep in on yourself. And this is the trine between Pisces and Scorpio, where you will notice, guaranteed, 100% of the time, when somebody loses a loved one or there's a loss or a deep shock, it immediately catapults us into this kind of spiritual experience of what is the meaning of life. And, sometimes we can even go to the opposite side where we feel victimized by it. And we're like, why did this happen? Why could a good God like you take a loving man like that from my life? We can feel overwhelmed by it. We can feel sort of like victimized by it, right? Neptune. But that's not its intention. In fact, there is no intention in the context of the astrology itself. There is no human interaction. The astrology is not looking at human beings and going, oh, well, you lost somebody over there and I'm really, really sorry about this. And unfortunately, you're going to feel this way, but maybe the next time around, I'll help you see it spiritually. It's like our personal relationship to this dynamic. So it can feel very, very intense for us to go through these shocks and loss and feel devastated, obviously, right? Devastation is a part of this archetype. We can feel all sorts of really, really powerful emotions come through to the surface that we don't usually have access to in our conscious daily lives because we're not looking at life through that lens. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming up to the surface regarding these archetypes, and the theme of loss and letting go and detachment and like rage, anger. I mean, these are all the types of energies that will come up to the surface for us to really release. And we have to feel that release. We actually have to like watch these emotions come through, because when you see the planetary ruler of Mars, it's Uranus. And Uranus is in Taurus retrograde. It's squaring the personal planet. It's opposing Venus. And so now, all of a sudden, we're sitting with this dynamic here, and we've got a lot of subconscious memories coming through to the surface, which again is a big deal for the ego, because the ego is simply looking at life from the point of view of, logical sequence. Today's Monday, tomorrow's Tuesday, and that's how I've been conditioned to live life, and everything's sequential. And then when something sort of transpersonal comes along, or a karmic, your planets are being hit by these energies at a karmic degree, and your karma comes through from a previous lifetime where you've experienced the loss of somebody, and this is an opportunity to process through that grief in this lifetime. And the ego doesn't know what to do with it. So we experience even more like loss and confusion and detachment and misunderstanding, because of that Uranian component, because Uranus is involved in this deeply. It's very, very important to give yourself an incredible amount of space during this period of time to process these things without feeling like, if like try to give yourself as much compassion as possible, and to not like react during these states, even though it's very difficult to it's very easy to say, but in those states it can be very difficult. Like, I encourage you to really, really stay as grounded as possible. Do grounding meditations, go into nature, do walks, in the forest, etc. Find a pattern during this Venus retrograde cycle to work through whatever is coming from the underworld. And this is the whole Persephone series story that's coming up here, right? These asteroids are referring or referencing us and pointing us to saying that this is not a like a little current energy transit that's here to kind of make you make more money or anything of the sort, or you're going to recommit to this. It's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot more profound than that. And it's really, really big, which is why a lot of people can flip out during this period of time, because we're going to like basement level 35 into the core of who you are as a being, not only of this lifetime, and we can feel that like, what am I supposed to do complex. And the Persephone says, here is where we're going to be invited to explore our innocence. So the kind of wisdom that comes from this energy at the moment in this chart is that we have experienced throughout our lives a tremendous amount of suffering. And we've witnessed it, and we see it, and we get desensitized to it. And every single day of our lives, we wake up and we try to put on a brave face to deal with the world. But there's an emotional part of us that really knows that it's painful. Human suffering is really, really intense. The North Node in Leo and the Sun and these energies with the new moon in Libra and the Mercury and their connections, right? The Sun squaring Pluto as an example. That's another reason as to why it's deeply intensified. We're looking at Neptune making an inconjunct to the Sun, right? Neptune's 14 degrees, the Sun's 15 degrees. This is a natural inconjunct. The Sun and Neptune don't even see each other. So we don't even see the correlations between all of this tragedy happening in our lives right now. All we know is that it sucks, and we've like been first class tickets straight into the belly of the beast, in which all of this emotion is just sitting over here, that it's collective and it's individual. And if we're not like handling it in a way that is rooted in empathy and space to process these big feelings, it can be very easy to lose your stuff, to really get like angry and project a lot and feel victimized by experiences. There is a purpose to this, and that's what I'm talking about with the suffering dynamic. Is, there's a lot of talk about Leo being about creative self-actualization, and I've said this before. It's about, like, here is me, I'm going to be star of the show, and that's fantastic because it's still the ego conditioning. But at the heart of the Leo energy is the actual heart. And it's your capacity to really be open to knowing that true wisdom lies within the heart's journey through this reality. In other words, that maturity, to me at least, maturity from a mental state can talk about developed IQ, but then there's heart intelligence, heart maturity. And heart maturity is being open in situations where you're vulnerable. And I'm not talking about staying in an abusive relationship. I'm not talking about being completely trapped in a narcissistic reality and then telling yourself, oh, I feel compassion for your brokenness. I'm talking about being aware that part of life has this darkness to us, this shadowness to us, this trauma to us, this suffering to us. And on the other side, there is this polarity that is what it means to hold joy and happiness and excitement and possibility and freedom and all the other emotions that really pull you towards an experience versus block you off from it. You know, the heart being this ability to either pull you to experience that transforms you or repels the experience because it's not resonating, right? It's not something that you're open to. And the wisdom that exists within this whole entire mechanic is what is available to us right now. That sometimes we're going to have parts of our hearts that are going to have bruises on them, from the first time that you felt abandoned by a friend to the first time that you had your first crush and you opened up your heart to the fullest capacity with all of your innocence. And then because it was the first experience, the cycle ended. The law of impermanence came along and, you know, the heart fluttered, and now all of a sudden it's attached to somebody else and you feel that. And it's about being brave to still be open in knowing the right thing in life, being open to experiencing life when there has been a tragedy, when there has been a wounding, when there has been a betrayal, you know. And the wisdom that comes from the betrayal is a deeper, space of caution in you to open up slower and to get to know somebody at a deeper level, and to allow yourself and your heart to take chances. You know, it's all about what the intelligence of the heart is about in this conversation today, and what this chart is really opening us up to, and how we can relate to not only ourselves, but how can we relate to another person. So it's like things like holding presence for another person when there is resonance, you know, intimacy being something that is about fully taking in the person and acknowledging where your personal judgments are on the other person's experience. Noticing where your own resistance lies in your body when you're interacting with something, and noticing where you feel that you have a personal judgment on something based on an experience of the past, where that judgment is cutting you off from the potential of growing, as an example. And again, I have to put it out there in a very, very clear way. It's essential for you to really, really understand what I mean by this, for my own sake and for yours as well. This is not to be confused with looking at your situation, feeling and knowing inside of yourself that this is not a healthy situation to be in, and then going, I need more compassion for the other person while you are suffering yourself. Or it's about learning how to respect yourself. It's learning how to know when your heart is going to be open to an experience or when it needs to be closed to an experience. When you can give yourself to something and allow for it to come back to you. And for me personally, there's lots of people out there in the world, so it's not one size fits all, but I don't personally believe that this is something that we have had education on when we were at school, you know, when we were getting educated. There's no specific class that talks just about heart resonance and frequency and how to deal with these things. So from my point of view, I feel like we're really, really young at being able to understand what this is about, and to fully live in that space completely without certain fears and subconscious memories of prior lifetimes that have, you know, that bleed through into this reality that we perceive as something that's happening to us. So it's an invitation to to really look into how you can be there for yourself with the Venus retrograde, and to also recognize what types of needs you have in your life right now, and how do those needs really support or not support the process of you living your fullest potential, which is living in your heart, living in the space where the vulnerability of being judged if you want to start up a new YouTube channel, or the vulnerability of social conditioning being something that tells you, oh, you're really wrong at that, or you can't do that. And so when you want to really follow your heart, there's this little voice that turns around and says, don't do it, because the feeling of humiliation is too much and you don't want to experience that, do you? And it's like, yeah, that's true. Feeling humiliated from a different lifetime or a different experience wasn't fun, but it doesn't mean that I should allow that fear to control me feeling my heart sing, you know? So it's working through the heart. It's working through what has been hurt and betrayed and wounded in there, and allow that wisdom to give you insight into how you approach the next situations, but also at the same time recognizing how the fear can hold you back from really living in that space and fully engaging in life, in the darkness that life can be, the battleground that life can be. And it's not a battleground in terms of like 300 or Lord of the Rings or, you know, the latest war film. It's not about aggression and fighting. It's about receptivity in a place that opens you to receiving, and receiving in a way that gives you wisdom about what life wants to show you as a gift. So it can feel like it's a battleground because sometimes it's just really, really tough to deal with, and it's really emotionally overwhelming. You could be one of those people that has recently just experienced the loss of an animal, a favorite pet, a friend, any of those things, and that tragedy has really put you in on yourself. And you're sitting there with a lot of these big feelings, feeling confused or not know what to do, or just really, really empathetic, which again is the key here, the heart living in that space of a true hero being compassionate and empathetic and sensitive, even when there is life going, hey, here's danger. And the heart knowing that this is danger and saying, this is not going to be good for us, or this is not going to be good for me. Versus, oh, I don't want to do that because I don't like the feeling if this happens, or should that happen, you know. It's a different vibe. The difference is, one is the mind sphere and the other one is a resonance in the heart that says, this is where I shouldn't go. It's not safe. There's caution. You understand? And the astrology represents it through the context of the heart. You know, the North Node, everything's been funneled through that dynamic. And the Mars on the South Node is pulling us away from fractured lifetime or fractured aspects of our emotional self that has been caused through wounding or separation or the law of impermanence, and to really be brave enough to take it on board, you know, to feel unsafe when sharing your vulnerabilities and your insecurities, you know, all the time in that sense. Okay. I hope that you got something out of this conversation today. I never come into these conversations with a plan of what to talk. I just kind of tune into what I feel based on what I see over there, and it just comes out. So if you're one of those people that really resonates with that, I deeply appreciate that. If it's not something you resonate with, I'm sorry that that's the case. I hope that there are other astrologers out there that are able to meet you where you are in your own personal experience. And I say that with sincerity because I feel like it's really, really important to step into a place and recognize that the world we're entering right now is navigated through the heart. And when we navigate through the heart, what we're doing is we're not using what is called limbic resonance, which is emotional relatability through familiarity, but it's more about what is the frequency within my heart saying about this experience, and going, yes, it's either magnetized or not. And if it's not magnetized, you kind of move into alignment with the reality that is. And that's the beauty of the internet. That's the beauty of the world at the moment, is that everybody can actualize and there's a pairing for everybody. And it prevents us from feeling like we need to share our thoughts and opinions about something that it's a judgment of what we have inside of our preference about ourselves, about other people. And this is what this Libra thing is really about here, and a lot to do with this Venus retrograde thing, is that we can find ourselves being deeply judgmental about other people's process, and place expectations on other people through it being something that it's a lot easier for the other person versus the attention on us. You know what I mean? You know, in relationships per se, it's very easy for us to not feel comfortable with emotions and ask and tell the other person that they need to kind of like, you know, not be like that so that we don't feel our emotions. I know that for me personally, in my own storyline, there is a lot of that conditioning that I inherited from my, you know, parents and stuff. So it's like my wisdom of learning how to process that with the Libra symbols and seeing it in the world as well, and watching how easy it is for us to get other people to do their work, but to never ever feel like we can liberate ourselves from our own suffering by not confronting what attachments we have to the things we don't like in ourselves. Okay, so that was another little spontaneous spurt. I want to encourage everybody to go at least check it out, okay? So I recently recorded and created a online self-study essential needs workshop, okay? So it's on my website. The link is in the description below. Go check it out, go read into it, and give yourself time. If you're somebody that wants to wait a little bit to see what it is, that's great, but just go and check it out. The point is, it's specifically created to help you watch the process, okay, and understand how you can understand your own needs by using your own astrology chart, how you can see in your chart where you can place expectations in a relationship, and how you can rewire your ability to acknowledge and express your own needs so that when you're interacting with people during this period of time, that you're able to really get to the core of what needs were unmet for you when you were a kid, and how you can bring them to the surface so your adult self can honor your inner child's needs. So this is what this whole entire workshop's about, and I love creating it because not only is it something I apply with myself, but it's also something that isn't done in astrology in a way that exists on the internet. You know, like EA brought through the formula that I used, and it helps deeply with understanding karma, but this specific approach is bringing something where we can practically use the astrology to help heal ourselves versus just looking at the astrology and going, oh, okay, that's Venus retrograde at the moment. That's probably why I'm just feeling this way. But not really using the full potential of the Venus retrograde, which is to get to the core of what attachments you felt were unmet so that you can clear them out. And then in the next conversation go, hey, by the way, I noticed that I got irritated because the feeling of not being heard came up, and I'm sharing it with you because this is agitation, versus why are you doing that to me? You know, the blame thing. It's so easy to tell the other person that they're doing something to you when that could not be the truth. You know, if somebody's hitting you over the head, I get that, right? Like, why are you hitting me on the head? But if we tell somebody, like, you're being unfair to us, it's an intangible thing, because fairness to one person and fairness to another is different. The measurement is different. It's intangible. Any person that did philosophy would know that. So what this like workshop does is it helps you get in touch with your own measurement of what you consider life to be. And then when you communicate in relationships, you go, I see that I'm feeling unfairness over here, and so I'm going to share that. And maybe I could ask the person to recognize that that behavior is to me unfair, and here's what I could you offer this in return? Like, could you, yeah, whatever. And it creates a very interesting dialogue between two people seeing the needs of everybody or themselves, but not getting caught up in the blame game. I think to break away the blame game is really something that I feel like inspired by it. So the link is in the description. Go check that out. And that is about it. So thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate your time and your attention. Love to all of you. And we will see you in our next video. Take care. Bye-bye.